Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
All right, some of you said this is the biggest icon you've ever seen. And then what did you say, Shaylee? Yeah, in Denver, we have a much bigger icon on the ceiling, right? The highest point in the church is Christ enthroned. That's supposed to be the biggest icon and the highest icon, because of course how great God is. But I apologize in advance to those of you adults who were able to come down to Denver for our parish feast on Monday, because I'm going to kind of repeat that homily, but I want to explain it to the kids, because of course most of you were not able to come up. So, on Monday, this past Monday, we celebrated the feast of the protection of the Mother of God. What does that sound like? Our church, that's the name of our church in Denver, isn't it? Protection of the Mother of God, the holy protection of the Mother of God. What a beautiful name, and it's a beautiful feast. So, this is the big icon we have in our church in Denver. I brought it down so you guys could see it, especially you kids, because you can come close. So, you know how you mentioned, Shaylee, about the big icon of the Pantocrator? Christ enthroned and Christ the King, Christ the Almighty, on the ceiling of the church, in the dome. And so we see it here too. Now, this icon is from an event that happened a long time ago. And the year was in the year 9/11. A very easy year to remember, right? Because of what happened in our country on September 11, 2001. But at 9/11, something very similar was happening in Constantinople, where our church is from, modern-day Istanbul. What was happening was the barbarians, and our forefather barbarians, the Slavs, before they were Christian, were attacking the city of Constantinople. And this is the church that everybody was gathered in. So you can imagine this church in the middle of a city, and the city was being attacked, and the army from Constantinople was trying to defend it. They were trying to protect. Remember that word? They were trying to protect the city, and they weren't doing a very good job of it because they were only human. Yes?
In the end,
Oh, shh. She knows the story. You know it too well, little one. Let me explain to the others, because you don't want to give away the ending, right? All right. So they're all gathered in the church praying. You could tell the story for me. I might even have you do it. Right? They're gathered in the church praying, and this down here is Romanus the melodist. You can kind of see him at a cantor stand. See the little cantor stand in front of him? That's because he's the one who's singing. Now, he was already dead at this point. He wasn't alive, but he's the one that wrote the prayer that they were praying at the time in the church. What they were praying was a prayer called the Akathist, or the Akathist to the Theotokos. It's a prayer service to the Mother of God, a prayer service to Mary. And they knew that Mary was like a mother, and mothers protect us, right? Mary was actually given to us to be our mother by Jesus on the cross. So they're praying to Mary to protect their city. And he wrote the prayer, and then what she was about to say, what happened is as they were praying, the dome of the church opened up. And Mary came down through the dome of the church. And this is a long time after Mary died. It was in the year 9/11. That's a long time after. And she came down, and she went right to the center of the church, and then she walked up to the front, and she knelt down right here where I'm sitting. In the Byzantine church, that's called the Soleia. And she knelt down on the Soleia, and she pleaded with her son. Who's her son? Jesus. She pleaded with Jesus to protect the city. And what did Jesus do? He did, but he gave her the ability to protect the city, right? Because she took her omophore, she took her vestment, this big white vestment hanging over her hands. And if you guys go to our church in Denver, you'll see it on the back wall, right? Right behind the altar, there's this big icon of Mary protecting the whole church with her vestment, with what she's wearing. And she came and she covered not only the whole church, but the whole city with her vestment, and protected the city from these barbarians who were attacking. And then the army that was in Constantinople started winning. They started casting him off. And of course, that was very, very important. And so even more than they first knew, Mary protected them. And so she had the title of protectress. But if you remember the story, not everybody saw that. Right? There's only 2 people in the whole church that actually saw that happen. Mary was invisible to all the rest of them. Yes? No one saw. Sometimes when God works, he's totally invisible, right? So it was clear, and they couldn't see it, but they had faith that it was happening. They knew that it was Mary, but 2 people saw it happen. Mary let herself appear to 2 people, yes?
When he stood outside and they didn't believe in Jesus.
There were 2 men, but one of them, this one right here, by looking at him, you can tell he's smelly, huh? He's not dressed quite right. He has a big long beard. He's not wearing many clothes. His name was Andrew. And he was what we call a fool for Christ. In other words, he pretended that he didn't talk very well. He pretended that he didn't think very well. He pretended that he was mentally handicapped. Because he was so good at so many things, he didn't want to be prideful about it. And so he said, I'm going to pretend like I'm not good at these things so no one will compliment me. That's hard to do, right? We like compliments. But he knew that compliments can sometimes get us in trouble because we can become prideful about it. So he pretended that he didn't have all those gifts. He even pretended to have less gifts than most people. He pretended to be mentally handicapped. And as he walked around the city, he was this way. And he brought his companion, his helper, Epiphanius, this young man here next to him in the icon, brought him into the church with him. And they're the only two out of the whole people that are gathered in the church, out of all of them. They were the only two that saw what really happened. All the other people knew by faith that Mary protected the city. That guy is actually King David. So he lived much, much earlier. But all, like John the Baptist, we see him there. King David, we see a lot of the people that lived earlier, lived later. But since they were still protected by Mary, not at this event, but they were still protected by her, so we put them in this icon because it's so big, so we have the room to fit them in. So that's what we did. We put them in that icon. But the important thing to remember, and I want to explain this to you guys, is that Andrew and Epiphanius was the young man with him. They were able to see, and God gave them the gift of seeing the reality of it for a very certain reason. And that's because they were very humble. And they were humble on purpose, deliberately humble. They tried to be humble, and God said, I bless your humility by letting you see the reality of what's going on. So what we have here is something very similar to what we heard in the first reading. In the first reading we heard, right there, that's a cloud, because those people were already dead at the time, like John the Baptist and David, etc. But what we hear is that they denied themselves. They were very humble. And in the first reading today, we heard St. Paul say that, right? He said these great things happen to somebody. He doesn't even name who he is. He says this happened to someone, that happened to him. And because there were such great things, he didn't want to brag about these great things, but he wanted to brag about the glory of God, that God allowed this to happen. So St. Paul was deliberately and purposefully humble too. So I heard a beautiful quote the other day. I don't have cable. So when I was in a hotel 2 weeks ago, I had cable, and there's a TV channel that displays only sports, 24/7. I was in heaven, right? So I was watching this. They had this show about this baseball player who played for the Colorado Rockies, and I can't remember his name, but he got Parkinson's disease. You guys know what Parkinson's disease is? It's where your whole body starts shaking involuntarily. And he was a catcher for the Colorado Rockies baseball team. It is bad, isn't it? Because you can't be a catcher if you're shaking like that. And so he hid it from everybody except his coach until it got so bad that he couldn't play baseball anymore. Then he had to leave baseball, and he loved baseball. And as he started getting worse and worse and worse, and everybody started saying, look how much he's shaking. He said, I can't take care of my daughter anymore. And he had a little daughter, and he would shake so bad that he couldn't take care of her anymore. And it became such a problem that he got really depressed about it. But after a while, he started getting used to it, and God started blessing him with being peaceful about it. And so as it got worse and worse and worse, and yet God gave him the ability to be peaceful about his disease, he had a quote that was very beautiful, almost like what St. Paul says today. He says, I'm getting stronger about being weaker. I'm getting stronger about being weaker. So he understands that as he gets weaker, that doesn't make any sense, does it? But it kind of does if you think about it. In other words, I'm able to be weak. As my body gets weaker, I become more able to be weak. Isn't that beautiful? Because as we get older, you guys are too young now, when we get older, we actually become better at being weak. We become better about our bodies being able to fail us. And that's so humble to say the most important thing isn't what the rest of society considers the important thing. And that's what Andrew and Epiphanius knew so well. They said, we can be strong even when we're weak. We can pretend to be weak, and it takes a very strong person to be able to be weak. And they had so much strength that God gifted them with the ability to see Mary protecting the city. Just like when Mary came down, she didn't say, I'm so strong, I'm going to protect the city. What did she do? She asked God. She prayed with them. And when she prayed with them, God gave her the ability to protect the city. As the same thing with us. If we humble ourselves, we say, Lord, I know you're the one working, then he'll give us the ability and give us the strength to do even the superhuman things like being weak. It's not easy to be weak. But St. Paul says, it's in my weakness that I am strong. And so we want to say that the strongest people in the world are actually the ones who are really weak and yet are happy and joyful even though they're weak. Amen?